last few days, there have been reports coming out from certain parts of the country that there is a shortage of cash, of currency, be it in ATMs or in certain cases even in bank branches. Now, those reports obviously picked up enough traction for the government to come out and clarify today. The finance minister put out a statement which was followed by a press conference from finance ministry officials as well. The finance minister said that the government has reviewed the currency situation in the country. Overall, there is more than adequate currency in circulation and also available with banks. The temporary shortage caused by sudden and unusual increase in some areas is being tackled quickly. Let me go across to Sanjeev Sanyal, Principal Economic Advisor to the Government of India, to understand what exactly has happened. Thanks so much, sir. Appreciate your time here on Bloomberg Quint. I guess my first question is just this. What is your best understanding of what has gone on and what parts of the country are impacted by the currency shortage, if at all?
As the finance minister pointed out, there's been a sudden and unusual spike in demand for cash in some parts of the country, particularly in Karnataka, Telangana and some of the surrounding states, although today we saw that spread to a few other parts of the country as well. I would not like to speculate who and why this particular spike has happened, but let me assure all people watching this show that the government is very aware of what has happened and will respond. There is no need to panic. We have more than adequate cash and they will be supplied both through the ATMs and the bank branches very, very quickly in the next few days.
No, that clarification absolutely taken, sir. But, you're calling it unusual. So then is it fair to assume it's not linked to typical drivers like, for instance, a pickup in inflation, which we don't have right now in the economy, or festival season, or perhaps, elections, where at least historically in India, every time there are elections, you do tend to see cash move up or currency in circulation move up. So you're saying it's none of these, or it could be these plus others?
Well, as I said, I'm not in a position to speculate exactly what has caused it. Nevertheless, it is unusual in that this is certainly more than what would normally have happened due to a festival season or whatever the usual seasonal factors that are there, which would have already been accounted for by the Reserve Bank as a normal matter of course. So there has been a spike, but our first order of response is to make sure that adequate cash is available at ATMs and in banks so that whatever demand, for whatever reason it is there, is met. Because there is no crisis, the banks are in perfectly good shape and we have more than adequate cash and more will be printed if necessary to supply it. So there is absolutely no need for anybody to panic about this.
Over what period of time has this shortage or reports of this shortage emerged? I'm sure you have first-hand reports. Is it a couple of weeks? Is it something that's built up over a period of time? Because some of these things in cash in particular are sort of self-enforcing. You talk over here of cash shortage, you go and withdraw more cash and sort of make the situation a bit worse.
So there was an increase over the last few weeks, but I think it's really in the last few days that this has certainly come to a point where, obviously it's in the media and requiring a somewhat more quickened response from the RBI and the government. So, even in the normal course of being, these kinds of things like demand for cash do spike up and down within some range. So, one doesn't respond to every unusual thing. But yes, what has happened in the last few days is certainly outside the normal range, so requiring consequently clarifications from the government and a somewhat quicker response now from the Reserve Bank and the Finance Ministry on a coordinated basis.
Is the government and the RBI are they planning to sort of step up the currency printing process in the interim to make sure that there is no shortage, or is it simply a case of taking currency which was lying in other states and moving it to the states where a shortage has emerged?
So obviously the Reserve Bank does keep some reserves of cash. So the first thing we will do is make sure that that is supplied through. But yes, some speeding up of printing may be required and that will be done as necessary.
it's speeding up, Sanjeev, then is there an indication that even at an aggregate level, there is some sort of inadequacy in the supply of currency in circulation vis-a-vis the demand in currency in circulation? Because, you know, supply always tends to catch up with the demand rather than other way around, no?
See, we have to accommodate the demand for cash as and when it arises. We are not attempting a second round of demonetization at all, which some people in another channel were asking me. This is a case of a spike in demand. We will supply the cash as necessary. So whether it's needed from ATMs or from bank branches, whichever part of the country, it will be supplied. Now, yes, there may be some logistical issues about this, about getting the cash that we already have printed to the correct locations. If necessary, we may also need to print more. Both of these will be done as necessary. Also remember that there's been a sudden spike, that the spike may suddenly peter out and there's suddenly too much cash. So, you know, we need to judge. It's a matter of judgment and management along the way. But, you know, response will be made, and you know, both the government and the Reserve Bank are watching this very closely and will respond quite quickly to whatever happens.
Now that point is taken. I'm going to persist with this, you know, aggregate, you know, currency in circulation for a minute, Sanjeev, because, you know, as a percentage of GDP, we are at 10.9% of GDP now. We were at about 12% of GDP before demonetization. I think the assumption being made was that the gap is behavioral change. Now, what if that behavioral change has started to peter out, which means we are in a scenario where there's a little bit of shortage of currency just by virtue of the fact that the percentage of GDP is lower than what it was pre-demonetization?
Well, I wouldn't like to speculate that. You know, based on one data point, I wouldn't like to make grand, you know, forecasts on long-term behavioral change. So let's wait and watch on this. That is only something that we can tell after a little bit of time has elapsed. The first thing as policymakers, the first response for the time being is to make sure that cash is available throughout the system to for whatever reason it is necessary, will be provided. So that is the first instance. Obviously, we will investigate why this is happening and whether this is a persistent behavior. And again, policy responses will be formulated. But let us not take that away from the fact that our immediate response is to make sure that everybody has enough cash, especially since there is absolutely no reason to be getting you know, excessively concerned about this. You know, we have cash in reserve, and we are entirely capable of printing more.
Okay. Let me ask you about the logistics side of it then, Sanjeev. There are no concerns on the logistic providers, any sort of shift in logistic providers because of regulation changes, which may have led to, you know, temporary, you know, problems in terms of cash being supplied to some of these locations?
Well, not to my knowledge. I mean, but this is something that you may want to pick up with the Reserve Bank of India. This is not something that is really in my knowledge area.
Okay, nothing that has been brought to the government's notice at all?
Not to my notice. It may be somebody else in the government may know.
Okay. I just want a thought from you also on the denomination of currency, Sanjeev. What is, you know, the latest data that you have available in terms of, you know, low denomination notes as a percentage of the overall currency in circulation, at least up to 100 rupees? Because I think that's the other thing that people have constantly worried about, that enough low denomination notes are still not in stock.
So, you know, every effort is being made to make sure the low denominated notes were being done. In fact, I think the mix of notes had in recent months been shifted towards the lower denomination notes, in the logic that that is what actually gets used. The notes below the 5,000 rupee, 500 rupee denomination is what really gets used in everyday requirements. So that is what had been done. But again, there has been some criticism that, you know, maybe more 2,000 rupee notes should have been put through or not. But anyway, as the demand shows up in the system, we will supply it as necessary.
So you're stepping up printing of 2,000 rupee notes, at least that's what the Economic Affairs Secretary seemed to suggest in his briefing earlier?
Whatever is necessary we have here what I would consider is entirely unnecessary concern about something that is frankly a short-term mismatch, and there is certainly no reason why we should all begin to get too so concerned about it or panic about it. The public certainly should not get concerned about it. We will fix this within days, so that this unusual situation is unwound.
All right, I have two other questions. Again, at the briefing in the afternoon, there was a comment made about some concerns about hoarding. Sanjeev, is there any evidence that has come to your note which suggests hoarding? And if so, what is that evidence? Is it, lower proportion of currency going out, coming back into banks, or is it something else that is being looked at?
Yes, some extent the amount of money going out is not the extent is not coming back, which shows up obviously in the proportion of cash to GDP. So, but this while this we have watched this happen, I am not in a position at this juncture to speculate on exactly what caused this to happen. As I said, our first response is to make sure everybody has adequate cash for the time being. We can, and even in the normal course of things, you do get, periods where unusual things happen in an economy. So one shouldn't begin to read too many things into it. Nonetheless, if we do find that this was something that needs further investigation or policy action, appropriate action will be taken.
Is this coming from the same states where we are seeing a currency shortage, talk or evidence of money not coming back into banks?
Yes, of course. I mean, that is where the shortages came. So that is certainly the case, yes.
Okay. Sanjeev, I asked this question very carefully. I'm not being irresponsible at all, but I'm going to ask it in any case.
I'm afraid I have to,
Last question, Sanjeev.
I have to leave, unfortunately.
Okay, just a last question. I'm just going to ask you one last question, and I'm asking this very carefully, as I said. There has been news flow in the past 6, 8, maybe even 12 months, which has not been entirely positive for depositors, whether it was the deposit insurance bill and the fracas around that, or it's the concern about bank health. I don't want to say that that's having an impact on depositor psyche, but still, is the government mindful of those concerns, and is it doing anything to alleviate any concerns, if at all they exist?
We are always, if the citizenry is concerned about something, it is our business to allay it. So let me clearly state this again. If there are shortages in cash availability in a bank or otherwise, this is not a reflection in any way about their solvency. We have in the last year or so carried out a major cleanup of the banks. This was a good thing in that we forced the recognition of bad assets. And now, as we go through the insolvency process, using the IBC and the code and the NCLT courts, we have begun to clean up the banks, begin to auction off and liquidate these bad assets. Some of this has happened just in the last few days. So, if anything, we are cleaning up the banks and putting them on a much better footing than ever been. So, rather than get concerned about this, you should in fact look at the fact that we are now in fact cleaning up them and putting them into a much better state. And in any case, the availability of cash in the system has nothing to do with all of this. This is, as I said, a logistical problem that is now being fixed, and we will fix it. Yes, we were taken a little surprised by, we were certainly surprised by this sudden spike in demand, but we are more than in a position to supply whatever cash is necessary for whatever reason by the public at large.
Sanjeev Sanyal, thank you so much. Appreciate your time here on Bloomberg Quint.